Ah, freshly cooked pork. What a glorious sight. My celebratory dinner for what one commentator described as my first scalp proudly hanging over the fire. But let's spare a thought for the prey. PC Mark Knights, who has just been convicted in Derbyshire Magistrates Court for assault. Around this time last year, he thought it was okay to headbutt a driver in the face who took offence to being called a fat cunt by the same officer. Knights is the general rule of Derbyshire policing, where officers are taught that brute force and dishonesty are the only way to keep the ungrateful public in check. To help Knights get off with his crimes, Derbyshire Constabulary assigned corrupt investigator Richard Layton to conduct a laughably defective investigation, as he's probably done countless times in the past for other violent police officers. He then passed a Rizzler thin file to the CPS, who were also primed to look the other way, before giving Knights the result that he and his policing colleagues have come to expect every time for their criminal behaviour. No further action. There it would have ended, except for one annoying fly in their ointment. Me. I brought a private prosecution, and despite countless obstructions from the court, I succeeded in having Knight summons for common assault, to which the CPS had a sudden and utterly coincidental change of heart, revisited the case, and decided they would prosecute Knights after all. Upon finding him guilty, the presiding judge told Knights, "In a moment of aberration, you struck a man, and with the passage of time, you've convinced yourself you acted lawfully." Yeah, but it wasn't just the passage of time that convinced Knight he was acting lawfully. It was also the whitewash culture of policing, the Professional Standards Department, the CPS, the IOPC, and not forgetting the MP of that particular area, Nigel Mills, all of whom refused to even acknowledge that a crime had been committed and that a serving police officer was roaming the streets, posing a threat to members of the public. Prosecutor Mark Fielding told the court PC Knights could and should have done something else. Perhaps a punch to Mr. Joyne's corpulent stomach or a push would have sufficed. That's the prosecutor's way of calling the victim a fat cunt as well. With a prosecution barrister like that, who needs a defence solicitor? But then what do you expect, seeing as Fielding was dispatched from the same organisation that refused to prosecute him in the first place, the CPS, or the Cop Protection Service, as it should be known. As well as other platitudes, the prosecuting barrister described Knights as a bit of a unit, whatever that means. Looking at it, maybe that last word was a misspelling. Naturally, Knights was spared jail, unlike you or I would have been if we'd headbutted a police officer in the face, but as they're held to a much lower standard than we are, what more can you expect? You only have to glance at the sentencing guidelines to see how charitable the judge was in passing sentence. Aggravating factors of common assault that indicate greater harm and increase the sentence include injury or fear of injury, which is serious in the context of the offence. Victim is particularly vulnerable because of personal circumstances, sustained or repeated assault on the same victim. A headbutt is about as serious as an injury you could get in the context of common assault before it crosses over into the offence of actual bodily harm. The assault was sustained in as much as the victim was handcuffed and thrown in the back of a police van, with Knights invoking the assistance of his colleagues to further that assault. Bear in mind that the court initially refused my application to additionally summons Knights for the offence of false imprisonment or for abusing his powers of office under Section 26 of the Criminal Justice and Courts Act. But common assault was the only offence Judge Taff would issue summons for, and the only offence the CPS would pursue, probably because they knew the resulting penalty would be paltry. The sentence should also have been subject to increase in respect of aggravating factors such as abuse of power and position of trust, established evidence of community impact, and most notably of all, any steps taken to prevent the victim reporting an incident, obtaining assistance, and from assisting or supporting the prosecution. Looking at the facts, Knight's vile behaviour falls into Category 1 of the sentencing guidelines, which should have resulted anywhere between a low-level community order to 26 weeks in custody. Instead of jail time, Knights was given a 6-month curfew order and ordered to pay a whopping £100 toward the victim. So it's just as well I referred the case to Ian Gould at the same time I began my private prosecution, so at least the victim can sue Derbyshire Police for a telephone number. To add insult to injury, just look at Derbyshire Police's response, aka a catalogue of lies to the news report. The initial incident was reported as a complaint about a police officer and not an alleged crime. The force put the criminal case to the CPS. However, there were further delays to charging decisions, something outside of the control of the force. An initial decision to not charge PC Knight was appealed by the force as well as by the victim through the formal review process. During the point at which this review was being carried out, a private prosecution was brought on behalf of the victim before the CPS decided to charge the case criminally themselves. In other words, Derbyshire Police are doing as much as possible to distance themselves from the reality that bringing a private prosecution is the only way to get them to do anything. The victim reported the incident as a criminal assault from the get-go. The police refused to record it as a crime and even refused to record it as a complaint. Instead, they took 2 weeks before they even bothered to contact the victim. By that point, the victim had already got in contact with me. Derbyshire Police most certainly did not appeal against the decision not to prosecute. In fact, they did their very best to prevent the prosecution, especially as it was they who put Richard Layton onto the investigation in the first place. And nothing prevents the police from prosecuting one of their own. They don't need the permission of the CPS to do so. There was no delay to any charging decision. The only delay was Derbyshire Police's deliberate attempt to drag their exculpatory investigation as close to 6 months as possible so that it would be too late to prosecute Knights for common assault. With all that dishonesty from the Public Relations Department, it's little wonder Derbyshire Police has such a problem with corruption in its ranks. But despite this pathetic penalty being incurred against Knights, I'm banking on the expectation that this mindless animal has now lost his job, pending a misconduct hearing. That's my aim with all of these prosecutions, which is to have violent, vindictive and lawless police officers removed permanently from our streets. We currently have a major problem with the police goose-stepping all over the public civil rights, making up laws as they go along and brutalising anyone who refuses to kowtow to their ad hoc demands. Thus far, they've remained immune from accountability by the blanket protection they receive from the police service, the Home Office, and the media will go to any lengths necessary to prevent the public from discovering the awful truth that the vast majority of the police are totally ignorant of the law, have a predilection for violence, and are a far greater threat to the public than they are a benefit. This needs to change. This country deserves a proper police service, not a gang of self-serving criminals who prioritise government edicts and their own power-tripping motives over crime and disorder. I'm not going to overplay the success. This prosecution is just one shovelful of muck out the Aegean stable that is our current police service. But it's sending them a message. And that message is that the ruling class no longer have the monopoly on police accountability. We, the public, have the power to take action to rid ourselves of these criminal agitators, bullies and narcissists that are being conscripted into the police service at an alarming rate. We need to get every violent, power-tripping, public-hating, lawless cop off our streets and back under whatever flat rock they crawled out from under. If you are a decent-minded, law-abiding police officer who genuinely wants the best for the public and prioritises de-escalation over headbutting us in the face, then you've got nothing to worry about. But the rest of you should hand your notice in now, because if you don't, then you can expect a lawsuit or a private prosecution to catch up with you real soon. That's if an all-out civil uprising doesn't get to you first.